Welcome back to SysEng Quick. I'm your host, John, and today we're continuing our journey towards a fully customized Fedora desktop with niri. Last time, we updated the Ansible plays to customize the niri configs. Today, the focus will be all on user dotfiles. After our last episode, I had a big realization. I need this collection to be flexible and clean, which means zero personal bias. I don't want to place any of my choices as defaults. When you run this collection without touching a single variable, I want it to deploy a stock niri system. To achieve that, I ripped out most of the app and niri defaults. No more additional applications, and no default niri changes. We're only setting up the necessary infrastructure that doesn't have any defaults. That means things like SDDM, Mate Polkit, setting a sway background image, and sway idle timers. All that stuff that was in the defaults, they've been moved to inventory variables, which gives you the control. Finally, let's talk about the waybar config. We needed a better solution than just don't overwrite the config. I've now added a simple way to put a custom waybar config file directly into the inventory directory so the collection deploys your exact setup. Let's get started. Okay, I think we'll start by templating our git config. So let's make a new role, git task main.yaml. We're going to have one task in here, and that's just to template our git config. We're going to have a template file, and it'll go into our .gitconfig file in our home directory. All right, let's see if we can make that template. So templates gitconfig.j2. Now, what I decided to do is there are some values that are required in gitconfig, your username and your email. Everything else is optional. So I decided I'd have a dictionary of a bunch of sections, and then you can put whatever you want into those sections. So this is how that's going to look. We have our required user section, and these are the only variables that are specifically named. We've got a dictionary for the get user with name, email, and signing key. Although signing key is optional, so we have an if statement here. Everything else, we're going to say for section in our get sections, give it the key, and then give it the value, and indent it so it looks okay. Okay, there's our template. Let's go look at our variables. Let's start by making our defaults. So defaults main.yaml, and there they are. They're pretty simple defaults. We're not going to have any git configuration by default, because remember, I want this to be a stock configuration that you can tailor, not putting anything that is a personal choice of mine. So the get user is the only required field here. Let's go take a look at the meta information. So let's go into git and make meta main.yaml. Because these are dot files, everything is going to need the user dependency to get the home directory. Okay, so our argument specs, we've got our git sections. It's going to have just our section name and then a string for whatever you want to put in that section. I'm not sure if there was a better way to do these sections that have context. If you have a better idea, drop me a line in the comments or make a pull request. That'd be good too. Everything else is just the get user. This dictionary is not required because there is a default value, but if you supply it, we are required to have the name and email property. But the signing key is not required because you don't actually need that for git config. The last thing we need to do is get our vars, which has our get sections final. Let's go ahead and do that. Vars main.yaml. And here's our Jinja expression that combines our sections, extra sections, and our skip. It's similar to other things we've seen, filtering packages or RPMs in the past. Okay, that is our Git configuration. Let's move on to templating bash next. Okay, let's make our bash role. So bash task main.yaml, and let's go copy our bash task. Just like in git config, we're simply templating our files. But we have two files this time, so I'm going to do a loop over our bash templates. And we're going to have two bash templates, one for bash profile and one for bash rc. Okay, so that is our task. Let's go ahead and look at the templates. Let's make a new file in our bash role, templates bash underscore profile sh.j2. I put the sh on the end so that my extension recognizes it as shell script and will have some syntax highlighting. But you could use just j2, it wouldn't really matter. Okay, let's go over and find my bash template. This is pretty much stock Fedora. I'm adding this one section here in case you want to start a persistent SSH agent. It is false by default, so you won't have that in there by default. I've got a UMass setting too, so I'm using 0022 as the default, which is going to be stock on almost every server you ever connect to. So this is not 100% vanilla, but it's close enough in my opinion. Okay, that's our bash profile. Let's go to the more complicated template, bash rc, where most of the work actually gets done. So we have bashrc.sh.j2, and I'll go ahead and copy that template. Don't want to typo anything. Spent a long time working on these things. This is effectively vanilla except for the comment. Over here, we are setting our path in case we have extra paths we want to add. So this is how Fedora was doing that. They add the .local bin directory and bin directory inside the home directory to your path. But this is how they did that. So all I did was change it so that we can customize where the user paths are instead of hard coding those two specific paths. I've got a place for a bash custom prompt, so if you want to have a prompt that's different than the default, which I do, so I added that in there. I've got a couple of options for bash history. I don't actually know what all is in shell option for this shop command other than bash history options, so that's what I put here. Leave me a comment if you know what else that's used for, and maybe I'll make this more flexible in the future, but that's all I'm using it for right now, so that's where it is. The other bash shell options are using the set command, so we're just going to set any option we have in our bash shell options. We've got any environment variables the user wants to put in the configuration, so we're just exporting our key value pairs. I have a section for if you want to make bash functions. I make use of bash aliases and bash functions somewhat frequently, but you can't pass arguments to bash aliases, so I like to have custom functions for that. So that's why I have both functions and aliases. And we'll see an example of both a little bit later on. Next, we have the sourced file. There was one sourced file in the default bash RC. That's the bash completion. So we do add that in the defaults, but nothing else. So if you have other files you need to have for whatever you might want in here, there's probably other completion files maybe. I'm not really sure what else you'd have in there, but I wanted to be sure it was flexible, so I added this. This is stock Fedora. It's just saying if you have some local stuff on the server that you don't want touched, you can put it in here, and therefore you'll have extra stuff in here. So it's a nice way to make local configurations that won't be changed by your configuration management. Okay, so there is bash RC. What else do we need to do? Well, probably better go ahead and get the defaults for all of this. So let me go ahead and copy this. Let's go into bash and let's do defaults main.yaml. So these are pretty much all stock defaults. There are a couple of things I put in, I don't know, a little bit of a different way. We've got bash paths because that is used by stock Fedora to add the home directory's local bin and the bin directory. And then sources is for the bash completion. Now I went ahead and put these in like this because I wanted it to be a little bit easier to override them. So generally I want you to be using bash paths in like your custom thing as your defaults, but you might want to access defaults that were already there on the system, like the LL alias, for instance. So I made a place to have these variables even if you overwrite them, so you can reference them in your own configuration if you want to keep all of the upstream defaults. We'll see how that works a little bit later on, but that's why those look a little bit odd. Other than that, everything is just empty. I've got this false because we're not going to do the SSH agent by default, and the UMask, I went ahead and set that in here too. Okay, now we've got our defaults. Let's go ahead and make our meta. So meta main.yaml, we'll get our argument specs for our role. This is just defining everything that was in the defaults, what they are, yada yada, and what the defaults are for some of these things. So nothing really to see here. It's just for completion's sake, and so documentation works. And I think that leaves our var section. So let's go ahead and add that as well. Go into bash and make vars main.yaml. Okay, so here we're getting the aliases. This is another dictionary combining stuff. We add the extras, we get rid of the skips. I didn't turn it back into a dictionary. It's just going to be a list of those key value pairs, which is fine for what I needed to do. Here are the presets for the aliases. These are the ones that Fedora actually defined, which is why I have them in the bash role. Bash environment final, that is the exact same kind of way as this thing was. I think so is bash functions final. This one is different though. So for your path, it has to go in order, and a user might have a reason to have it in a very specific order. So what I ended up doing is putting all of the paths that you define before the system path. So it'll be before user bin, user local bin, things like that. And I wanted to make sure that I preserve the order that the user specifies. So we can't use any of these filters, combine or sort or unique or any of them, because a lot of them use set operations, and that takes away the ordering. So instead, I'm just doing it manually with a Jinja expression. We make what's effectively our set, the scene set, and we get our final results. So then we end up with, we loop through all the paths with any extra paths, and then we get rid of the skipped ones by saying if the path's not in skip, and we haven't seen it, so it'll be unique, we go ahead and append it to our scene and our result. And that's how we're building that up. This drove me nuts for a while because the configuration kept flipping back and forth between the ordering of the paths. And I'm like, why is it flipping? It looked identical to me. All I knew was that the SHA sign were different. I couldn't tell that the paths were changed. It was that subtle of a change in the bash RC. But finally, have found something that actually worked. So we've got our bash paths preset. So here are the paths they put, Fedora by default. We've got our final option here. I can use the union and difference because we are sorting it. As long as we sort it, it's fine to do this stuff. But if you're not sorting it, like we don't want to do here, because it will change the order, then we can't use any of these union, difference, or sort filters. Here is the bash sources preset, the one bash completion one. And here are our two template definitions, bash profile and bash RC. Okay, I think that takes care of our bash role. Next, let's go on to configure our SSH settings. Okay, let's make our SSH role. So I'll do SSH task main.yaml. And we have a couple more tasks in this file that we did in the other ones. We need to do more than just template some files. First, we need to make sure the SSH configuration directory exists, because it might not. It also needs to have 0700 permissions, or SSH will not like it and will not work very well. After that, we can template our configs because we'll have the directory. Every file in here needs to be 0600, at least I think they all do. There might be exceptions, but it's fine either way. And then we have more than one template, so we're going to loop over our templates. This last thing is for SSH identity file. These are public key files that you can use in SSH to limit what private keys are offered to an SSH server. This is useful if you have a password manager and you have several keys in the agent. You may overrun the number of authentication attempts you get from a server if you have too many keys, like I do. This is the way to tell it, only offer this key to the server, or these particular keys. So that's why this is in here. Maybe you won't need that, but I do, so it's in here. And it won't be doing anything if you don't use it, so it should be fine. Okay, let's go ahead and make our SSH templates. We've got two of them. The first one is for our authorized key. So templates authorized keys.j2. Let's go grab that template file. So it's pretty simple. We just have a little disclaimer saying, hey, this file might get overwritten. Be careful. And then we just loop over our authorized keys and put them in the file. Pretty simple for this. Now, there is a collection, Ansible.POSIX, and there is a way to add SSH keys to your authorized keys file. I do like that, and that's a good idea, but I'm also torn because that module will not remove keys that you don't want in there. So, do you want to have a module that only adds keys and you have to remove them yourself, or do you want one that manages all of your keys but could potentially remove one that you didn't mean to remove? I don't know. It's a mixed bag. I was a little torn, but I ended up going with this way in the end. So, it is what it is for now. Okay, let's make the SSH config. That's going to be config.j2. Let's go ahead and copy this. So this file is going to have three sections: a section for host pattern option, a section for match pattern options, and a section for common options. And the first match wins, so you want to make sure you have your most common, most generic options at the bottom, not at the top. Okay, this file has several things that are duplicated, so I went ahead and used some Jinja macros for this. I've got my little disclaimer here again, and we go ahead and use our macros. So for the host and pattern section, we have to do two things. We're generating the SSH host options final and SSH match options final here, rather than using the vars file. Mostly it's because we do the exact same thing more or less twice, so I didn't want to put it 2 times in the vars file. Also, it's a little bit weird as a Jinja expression, so I just thought it looked better in the template rather than in the vars file. But it doesn't really matter, just personal preference. Okay, so we're going to have a macro which is called merge options. It takes the options we're merging, the extra ones, and the skipping ones. And then it's going to convert that from JSON because these macros can only return strings. I had to make sure I get a dictionary here, so I use the from JSON filter to get that. Okay. That looks good for our macro. So for each one of these, and these host and match options, they have a dictionary, which is a key, which is the host or match pattern, and they have options, which are the key value options for that host pattern. So any valid SSH config option is in here. So we have nested dictionaries here. So the merge option is a little bit more complicated. Another reason I didn't want to use the vars file. So we'll specify our host pattern, and I have another macro for printing them out because this is done, you can see, 3 times in this file. I didn't want to copy it 3 times. I thought it'd be simpler to make it a macro, so I went ahead and did that. The match pattern, it's identical to the host pattern, just has match instead. I probably could have used a for loop for that, but anyway, it's fine, it's good enough. And then I have the SSH common options. This does not have a key, does not have a pattern because the pattern is asterisk. There's only options for everything. So didn't need to do the final for this. I had to get the final over here instead with the simple dictionary, the less complicated dictionary merging that we do. And then we just print those options out. So that is our template. Let's go ahead and make our macros file. So macros.j2. Go ahead and copy that. I don't know if I mentioned this, but here's, yeah, you import the macros at the top there. That's what I did there. Yeah. Okay, so we've got a couple of macros. We've got the merge options macro. So we're going to set a variable called merged, which is going to be the base options combining with the extra options. And we need to specify the recursive flag to the combine filter because we have a dictionary of dictionaries. I want to make sure that you can change keys that are within patterns. Then we set our final options, which will be our dictionary. And then we go through every pattern and our options in our merged list. We figure out which ones we don't want, so we get the skip keys. That's going to be the skips options getting on a pattern. So rather than skip options this time being a list, it too is a dictionary. A dictionary with keys as the pattern, and the list is the keys you want to remove. So this is kind of like the dictionary we've seen, or the list we've seen all along to skip things. It just can't be a list here because we need to have a nested structure to skip things. Okay, then we make our filter, so that's going to be a new dictionary with all of the items we had from our options, rejecting any of the ones that are in skip keys. 0 is the first attribute, that's what the item has, so the first item is going to be the key. We're rejecting any keys in skip keys. And then we go ahead and update final options with our new filtered options rather than the option we had in the beginning. Then we'll have our complete final options dictionary. We'll convert that to a JSON string. Okay, and here's how we print things. We're going to loop over the key values in our options. Now, this is where it gets interesting because some options for SSH config can be repeated. Things like local forward can, identity file can, things like that. So your option might be a single value, which is a string or a number. If it is, we simply print that key with the value. But it might be a list of values, like it would be for remote forward or something like that. In that case, we have to loop through those, repeat the key over and over with each new item. So that's what I did here to print out the options. Okay, there's our macro, and there's our configuration. Looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and add some defaults. Go ahead over to our SSH. Let's make defaults main.yaml. And these defaults are as default as they come. They're all empty list and dictionaries as appropriate. Go ahead and make the meta as well, meta main.yaml. We'll make sure we validate our stuff and that we have our dependencies and that we have documentation, all of those good things. Again, these are just what's in the defaults file, just validated and with descriptions, so I have docs and stuff. And we need the home directory, so we include the user role. Okay, where does that leave us? With vars, I think? Yeah, so we need the vars. So let's go ahead and make that vars main.yaml. So we've got our authorized keys final, our common options final, and our keys final, but not our host options final or match options final, which I define in the template. And then I've got the sh config templates for config and authorized key that we're looping over. Nothing special here. We've seen all this before. Okay, I think that's everything for the SSH role. So now we need to actually have the playbook run these roles. Let's do that next. In the niri playbook, I went ahead and added a targets variable so you can decide whether or not you want to target all the niri hosts or you want to target specific hosts or groups of hosts. So you can specify that on the command line with the -e flag. I went ahead and used that for testing because I added the blink host that I'm recording this video on right now to test a real system. Okay, so we could add all of the roles, bash and git and ssh, but I actually don't want to do that. I want this to be more flexible. For instance, some people may not use bash. You may not want to have bash templated in that case, so you may want to be able to turn that off. If we just add extra roles, we can't do that. So I want to have a different way of doing that. Also, adding a bunch of roles here kind of makes things cluttered up. I want to create a meta role instead. So let's do that. We're going to add a new role here, and I'm going to call it dotfiles. And then we'll have the tags be dotfiles. That should be an S on there. And this is going to be our new meta role. And I'll show you how we're going to use that to be able to conditionally include or exclude certain of our dotfile configurations. So let's go ahead and make that dotfiles role. So we'll have dotfiles tasks main.yaml. We're not going to have dependencies in here. Those are all in the other roles. We're going to actually include things in tasks. We haven't done that before, but I think it was the best solution to this particular issue. Okay, so we have 3 tasks here right now, including the bash role, the git role, and the SSH role. So we're doing all of those things. And we've made 2 ways to decide whether or not we actually run these tasks. We have tags, so if you want to skip one for a particular run, like you're testing something or you just changed one thing and want to go ahead and run it and not run the entire playbook, you can just specify tags.files bash or .file SSH. And that's a really good way to isolate parts of your playbook. However, some people may not use bash at all, and they may think, I don't want bash template. I don't want to do anything with that. Let's just leave it alone. So I made variables for all of these things so that if you set them to false, you can just not run these at all. In fact, later on, there may be dotfiles tasks that you simply have no use for. Maybe you use Emacs and I use Vim, and you don't want to configure Vim because that makes no sense for you. So you might skip that. Yeah, I'm sure there are other reasons, but that's what I went with so far. So we've got this to import all of our roles like we were in the niri playbook, but doing it in a slightly different way that's a bit more flexible. Okay, let's go ahead and add our defaults. So I'm not sure if I want these to be true or false by default. I have them true right now, but honestly, I could see them all being false and then you deciding which ones to include. So I might change that to false. You'll probably want to check that in the Git repo before you use it and see which one you want to do. But for now, I've decided to go ahead and enable everything. That made the most sense to me at the time, but for other people, it might not, but that's what it is. I feel like I'm almost certainly going to change this to be false because I'm hoping that in time, other people make contributions to this. Like maybe they'll have an Emacs configuration or a NeoVim one or some other program I don't use that I don't want to use for dotfile. So it probably makes more sense to have these as false. So yeah, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and change that to false. You'll have to enable all the ones you want. Okay, and then we have our meta file. Again, it's pretty simple. Let's go ahead and add our meta file. So that's main, no, that's not right. It's meta main.yaml. And then these all need to be false. Okay, and there we go. There's our meta to have our stuff there. So there we go. That is our dotfiles. So now we are ready to test and see if this works. At least we would be if we had all of our inventory variables configured for our stuff. So we'll go ahead and add that next. Between episodes, I made an inventory directory and moved the inventory in there into host.yaml. This allows us to have a bunch of subdirectories that are grouped more appropriately. So here are those custom files. If you want to override the waybar configuration, I put that here. And notice that I don't have style.css. I didn't make any changes to the default, so I left that as the role one. Besides that, we've got the group vars folder and the host vars folder. This is my idea for how these overrides should work. You'll start out with having your own defaults in the group vars all. This will be for all of your hosts, and then you can use the extra and skip to remove them there. So for instance, I'm going to enable all of the dot files for all of my hosts. But if I want to override that, I can do that in a more specific location, like a host var. So in Bash, I've got a few things I set up for there. So here are some of the aliases I want in Bash. And then I went ahead and kept the alias presets. I wanted to do it this way where I overwrite the bash aliases in the all, and then you can do extra ones in specific host. That made the most sense to me, that you'd have your own defaults. But this is one of the few that actually has some upstream defaults I wanted to keep, so I've got this kind of semi-convoluted way of doing that. But if you didn't want to do this, you could just copy them here, or you could overwrite them if you don't want them. That's an option too. But once we make this, the defaults that are in that role will no longer exist. So, and I'm pretty sure I can't say bash aliases and then have bash aliases in here and do that. They took away the merge functionality in Ansible quite a long time ago. I guess it caused more problems than it solved, but it makes a few problems too sometimes, so it's fine. I've got some environment variables, my bash history options, my one function with my argument. Here's my custom bash prompt. Basically, I tried to use the prompt I'm using in VS Code right now. For some reason, Bash doesn't like it. I don't know why. I mean, it's working, but they keep telling me I have an error in there somewhere, and I can't find it. So I asked AI to help me rewrite it. Honestly, this code is way more readable anyway, so it's fine. But I liked the VS Code one, so I basically kept what they did. I just changed a few things about it. And then I've got one bash shell option for VI mode. Get stuff, yeah, I've got my actual name and email and a bunch of sections, so here's how that would look like. We've got the commit section, I've got a credential for a credential helper, I like to use rebase on pull, I've got an alias, a safe directory, and I use Vim as a default editor. Or do I? We have this over here in get sections, but down in our host vars for my blink, I override that and say, no, actually, I want to use VS Code as my editor and as the diff tool. So I did that. Now, again, I don't know if there's a better way to do these sections, but this is how I decided to do it. So it's just an entire key. So you might have this and then the quote for the context in there. So if you have a better idea, leave me a comment. I'd love to hear about it. Okay, so this is basically everything I did. I simply moved all the defaults into places like this, and then if you want to override things, you can. So, like for instance, in Fedora niri Kickstart, I decided not to have all of those applications. I only put a few of them on the virtual host, and I told it to skip some of the defaults. I could have just skipped some of the packages, but it was easier to just list the 4 I wanted than the 5 I didn't. So just one or two things to think about. This is how I thought it would be best to lay this out. But let me know what you think in the comments about how this works. Do you find it flexible? Do you find it usable? Is it overly convoluted? Is it over-engineered? Do you have a better idea? I am open to suggestions. Okay, yeah, that's basically everything for the inventory, so we should be ready to do the demo and see if things actually work. Spoiler alert, I know they do. I've already tested this. I've been working on this for a while now. Okay, here we go. Let's do a ping check real quick. Let's ping all of our niri hosts. Yep, all 2 of them work. So we can just go ahead and run the playbook, Ansible playbook, syseng quick, fedora.niri. I want to add the tags of dotfiles. Don't need to do everything, just the dotfiles is good enough. So let's go ahead and do that. You can see it does it on both hosts simultaneously. I do love that. Template our config files, our get config, SSH config, identity stuff. This was the thing that annoyed me. Sometimes I'd be checking the SH config, and this, it's not a long time. If you do it like 20 times in a row, this wait time is really annoying. At least it is for me, so I hated that. So that's why I added those extra tags in there. You probably won't need them, but they were useful for me. Okay, everything worked. Let's go take a look and see what it templated. Well, I opened a new terminal on my B-Link host I'm on right now. You can see I do have my custom prompt. It looks very similar to the one we have in VS Code. If I type something wrong, it gives me the error code. That's one change I did make, so it turns things red. If I go into a Git directory, it shows me my Git branch, and I don't seem to have a virtual environment right now, but it would show that as well if it were there, but it's not there right now. So the prompt does seem to work. Let's check out the git config. So yeah, it templated everything there. We've got the warning there. We've got name and email. We've got all my aliases, commits, timeouts, yada yada. This all looks great. This is almost exactly what I had before. Let's look at bash profile. I didn't use the SSH agent, so that's actually not in here. I do use the UMask, and everything else is pretty much stock for that. It's a very basic file. Its only purpose is to exist, and there's a couple things you might have to do in a login shell that you don't want to do in every shell. The SSH agent is one of the few things I know you'd want to do there, but everything else is mostly fine. What about the bash RC? Yep, we've got our defaults. Here is our path, and that is what we have from our stuff, not from Fedora. Fedora uses $home. Either way is fine, but it's there. This is my custom bash prompt. I made a function for it. Oops, messed up. Made a function for it, and then set the prompt command. I've got a couple history options for things that I like. I turned on VI mode. I'm trying to get better at Vim, so I'm going to try to do more VI mode stuff. I've got a few stuff here, editor Vim, hist control, file size, yada yada, a bunch of stuff that's kind of useful. Maybe you'll find it useful. At least you have an example if you want to use that. Here's my one function, so this just helps me figure out when an SSL cert is going to expire. I've got a bunch of aliases, and thank God for the quote filter, because that is just a nightmare. I mean, it probably would have been easier to use double quotes rather than single quotes, but you know what? It handled it, and I'm fine. It took care of things. That was great. Here is the one sourced file. Fedora does this a little bit differently, but I felt theirs was overly engineered. I don't know what they were guarding against. I hope it's not important because I opted not to do it. It's stock Fedora, so I don't even have that directory. So, okay, what about SSH? Do I have my authorized keys file? Yes, I do. Let's actually remove the key I was using to connect to this from the dev container, so I can't do this again right now, but it's fine. You can see let's back up the files. You can see there was a different file here a minute ago. So we can even see what the changes actually were. So if you want to find out what happened, and you can read them like me, you can go see what it actually did. So it removed this key that I was using to connect, but don't really need it. It's fine. Okay, and I want to do a less on config. And here you can see that it can be fairly flexible to specify a semi-complicated SSH configuration file. I've got all kinds of developer hosts I connect to, all kinds of bastions, identity files, yada yada, all kinds of stuff that's somewhat useful. And then a bunch of default options down here that are useful, like my 1Password agent. Okay, so that looks like it worked. Let's go see if there's any difference between this and the Proxmox server. So let's connect to Proxmox at Fedora niri kickstart. I had to add the full domain because I added tailscale, and now tailscale domain, I don't have that on there right now. So, okay, it's a secret to everybody. You can see the prompts there. Bash RC should be mostly the same, maybe identical. It should be pretty close. SSH will be quite a bit different. Bunch of fake data in here that I was just testing with, but it's still there. It all still works. So, yeah, I would say this works, and I'm fairly happy with it. And I plan to start using this in reality. I have a few more things I want to do. I don't know if I'm going to make more videos, so you might want to go check the repo and see if I have made changes, added new kinds of dot file roles, because I plan to. Like, I didn't add a configuration for Vim. I didn't add one for tmux. I didn't add one for Perl tidy. I still have to use Perl sometimes. So there are a few other things that could be done that I'll probably do, but probably not on camera. So it's probably going to be it for this series unless I have another idea about it. This video is probably running long, so let's go ahead and end it there. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Come back and see us next time.